Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, good. Very excited for today's topic. Javier Milei, the Argentine president and libertarian phenom that has taken the world by storm, most recently with his speech to the World Economic Forum. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but really looking forward to getting into it. Um, I thought I'd start off with who is Javier Milei. According to Wikipedia, he went to Catholic school in Argentina, where he was nicknamed El Loco for his or the crazy one for one of his outbursts. He was in a Rolling Stones cover band. I'm sure that helped him hone his skills as a performer. He was even a goalkeeper for a soccer team in Argentina in the late 80s. Um, the page said that the currency collapse of the 80s in Argentina got him into economics and he became an economics professor. And in one of the videos, I remember he said about 10 years ago, he read some Austrian economists and realized that what he'd been teaching had been wrong this whole time. And he became kind of a free market evangelist, going after socialism and how it creates poverty. And I mean, there's videos of him going mostly after the left, some with subtitles. One that stood out for me is when the show host was trying to get Milei to take back saying that the left is shit. Milei's like saying, but they are shit. At one point he calls them libtards, which I'm not even sure how libtard translates from Spanish, but to me it just shows that he's not one of those both sides are bad libertarians. He kind of sees the left as a bigger threat.
Well, it's interesting that there's this word libtard to refer to these people. That's kind of like a universal concept now. And you get it in English and Spanish and probably every other language in the world.
Well, and one of the things that makes him, people are seeing a lot of Rand connection or Ayn Rand, is that there's a lot of, he talks in terms of like the left is morally inferior, just using that kind of language that the entrepreneurs are superior and people are hesitant to do that. And he's got that same kind of, uh, Trump bombast. And I'm hearing now a lot of people saying from the whole left side of the liberty movement is that Milei is nothing like Trump. But I mean, on that Wikipedia page, he really, a lot of his rhetoric was amped up in 2017. So I think it's fair to say he was at least inspired by Trump's willingness to fight. And they've probably inspired each other at this point. Trump
Well, it's
wants to
amazing.
meet with Milei. Go ahead.
It's amazing what a larger vocabulary can do for your reputation. I think Milei clearly is an educated person and can speak very well. And Trump, you know, he has trouble communicating, and uses very crude language sometimes. So even though Trump is obviously pretty smart, he doesn't speak very well, in my opinion. Um, and Malay, just from his speak, the translations I've read, I mean, he's obviously a very brilliant person, and he's got the credentials to back it up. He's an economist and understands the economy. He's also very literate and articulate. He speaks on the radio, has a radio program, and is giving speeches now. So I look forward to analyzing this guy, and I think in some regards he's the real deal. He is described as a minarchist, which is essentially just an objectivist in economics. So he's for limited government, and it's to be
I think he said
seen
he
whether he.
aspires to be an anarchist, but he's an anarchist in practice.
Oh, is that what he says? Okay, so
Yeah.
he's kind of like, I think he also shows a lot of signs of an orientation towards objectivity or objective reality. He's not up in his own head all the time in like fantasy land, and he's more down to earth person who's trying to deal with the real problems in Argentina.
Absolutely. And we will get into those clips. I do want to start with Yaron Brooks' initial reaction to Milei winning, the chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute that has his own show. And to his credit, he's genuinely excited about Milei winning. In fact, he sounds ready to join the government.
He will have a significant mandate. My advice to him, and by the way, if anybody knows Milei and he needs some advisors, he needs I don't know a secretary of the economy, or I'm sure he's got people in mind. But if he needs anybody kind of to bounce ideas off, I am available. I'd be happy to do it. I would want to find a way to support him and to see if you can put together a kind of a rational program, how quickly you can liberate an economy. To me, all of these are fascinating questions, and questions that it would be cool to be involved in doing. I doubt I'm going to get that phone call, but anyway, if anybody out there knows Milei, and you can tell him, my guess is he probably knows who I am, or he knows people, a lot of the people around him certainly know who I am. I am available as a consulting advice, anything like that.
I guess we've found, Yaron has found a reason to form a coalition with libertarians. You know, he finally found a reason to work with them. You know, whereas before he struggled, he's like, what's the point of working with them? He couldn't think of any reason. But now that there's this libertarian in Argentina, he wants to become part of Milei's advisors so that he can help him transition the economy to a free one, because he thinks that's a fascinating and cool project. So I guess his standard for working with libertarians is that it has to be a fascinating and cool experience.
Or they have to win first.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the clout chasing aspect, of course. You know, he wants Milei's subscribers, or audience, to subscribe to his channel so he can have a bigger channel and make more moolah from begging his audience to donate.
I love the he probably knows who I am. Oh, is that why he hasn't called yet?
Yeah,
Plus
that's a weird thing to say. Like, he doesn't exactly know whether Milei knows who he is. I mean, shouldn't he be like tight with Milei because they're part of the same movement for free laissez-faire economy?
You can't be too tight when you're soliciting the general public's help and trying to get an audience with it. Now,
yeah, well, he doesn't want to look too cozy with the libertarians. That's right.
well, but that to your point, I think that he should have to repudiate all of the things that Peter Schwartz and the other hate libertarian faction of ARI have been saying for years before they can consistently support him. I mean, Peter Schwartz said things like, if the libertarian movement ever comes to power, widespread death will follow.
Well, I guess we're going to be able to test that theory in Argentina. So we'll see if widespread death occurs over there.
That's right, but we were admonished never to give them moral sanction, which, meeting and wanting to become an advisor is kind of a moral sanction.
Yeah, but they seem to be moving away from that now. And on one hand,
I welcome them moving away from it, but you got to admit that, you weren't right before.
It's hard for them to admit that they weren't right. It's because then they got to explain themselves and explain how they're changing and talk about why they're changing their position. And it's,
you mean what objectivity requires?
Yeah, we're not exactly dealing with remorseful people or people who like to live in the past. Yaron says he doesn't deal with the past. He just plows forward, So it's not like he's going to revisit his old positions and write some essay on how he's reformed. That's not his style. So
I just look at it like a football team. We've been one of the tried and true members. We took the slings and arrows for supporting the libertarians when they were, at the basement. And now that they're starting to have some winning seasons, now the bandwagon people are getting in. They're like, yeah, I want to support the libertarians too. They're fair weather fans, and they're not admitting that they used to hate them when it was fashionable to.
Yeah, I think there's a way to deal with that and not be nitpicky. Like you can just like mention it in passing and say, I'm glad you're on board now with the coalition. Thanks for joining. Kind of remind them that they're not being fully honest with their past, but you're happy that they're changing.
I agree with that. That's my attitude towards Peikoff and seeing the threat of the left.
Yeah, so I think it's important that we try to move forward. If there's some dishonesty and like it's obvious that they're not good for the movement, then we can point that out. They're more of a pain in the side than a fresh recruit who's excited and honest to be on board.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the case with Yaron. I think he's just in it for clout, and hedonistic
That's your
ways.
defense of him.
He just wants to be cool. He wants to be with the cool kids. So that's the first thing that came out of his mouth, is that it's fascinating and cool. Really? Argentina's, in the dumpster, and it's a fascinating and cool project. That's his attitude. No, it's a serious situation that you need to take seriously. And
yeah, he's trying to not commit to get full bore behind it, but to say, oh, it's in, that's the same excuse he used to go to the Jordan Peterson conference. It'll be interesting to see how modern conservatives are. Here, it's interesting to see what it's like when a libertarian takes over an economy without fully getting on board. But back to his comments supporting Milei coming into power, he then suggests that his visit to Argentina last year might have actually made the difference.
Put together a kind of a rational program, how quickly you can liberate an economy. To me, all of these there are better people out there, and he might call himself an ANCAP. And he is religious and he's anti-abortion, although he wants there to be a referendum on abortion, at least not instituted from above, the banning of abortion. So anyway, let's see what happens. Maybe my last trip to Argentina is what made this possible. That's delusional, I know, but what the hell? Maybe this next trip will make it even, will help put together a completely rational program for him. Who knows? Maybe one of my people in Argentina can arrange a meeting with me and Milei when I'm out there in what do you call it, in April.
Yeah, so he gives us a nice glimpse into his psychological perspective. He's saying that, well, first of all, I can't tell whether he's joking or not. Is this an attempt at humor? The idea that his trip influenced the whole Milei phenomenon. He seems to be trying to take some credit for that and saying, my trip there caused this whole thing. And then he says, but that's delusional. So on one hand, it seems like he's trying to make a serious
That's his moment of honesty.
Yeah, but then his psychology comes out and he's like, oh yeah, I recognize that's delusional. But then he goes right back to the original point and saying, but maybe my next trip, will cause even more influence. And I'm like, I don't know how to read this guy. I think he's completely lost, and I'm completely lost, not trying to understand him. it's a bad thing, in my opinion, when you don't care whether your point is sane or insane, and you're not taking it seriously. Your ideas are just these things that could be true or could not be true, and you don't really care.
If
And
I'm being
often,
charitable, he just, put out that theory, was trying to be self-effacing by saying it's delusional, but then, went right back to the theory.
yeah, it's his rhetoric is delusional. It's like, what is he talking about? It's like he's going back and forth between polar opposites and just contradictions. So I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it's a joke. I don't know.
I just, he's describing Milei as religious, Rothbardian, anti-abortion, this ANCAP libertarian, and yet, they're kind of being given a little bit of a pass for all of that. I just think that he's still trying to get help getting a sit down with Milei. I suspect that they would almost turn on Milei if they don't get a meeting. And when the WEF starts turning the screws on it.
Well, maybe he'll invite Milei to the next OCON, and then Milei will destroy him in the little debate on a couch. And then he won't like Milei anymore, and Milei will become very dangerous.
That's right. But that is what it seems like. There's almost this back and forth between, we can't stand this person, or we want to have influence over them, and they need our help from here. And I think that's, it's part of, I think, possibly related to why they're not always getting their phone calls returned.
Well, I think serious people recognize that he's not really that serious. He's not serious about coalitions. It's only when he's chasing the audience of another.
We don't
Like
want to do the hard part. Not compromising means not building those coalitions, but then when someone does it and wins, then he's ready to, steer the ship from there. To he said one time that he'd run if someone gave him $100 million.
Run for
That
what?
he'd run for office.
He can't get more than 1,000 live stream viewers. He needs to become more popular before he can run for something. Maybe he'll run for a school. He'll start with his local school board.
Maybe it was delusional. But honestly, as he's saying all this, I'm going through this whole, feeling almost like Dominique, thinking Milei is mine, and you can't have him. Especially with Yaron being soft on the left versus Milei, who has been, very strong on the left. So I asked Yaron a question about Milei being an example of standing up to the left. I don't think Yaron cared for the question.
Scott, is part of the lesson of Milei that people want liberty leaders who will stand up to the left without the usual libertarian both side equivocating? Is this a question, Scott? I mean, what's the point of the question? I mean, it's stupid, as usual, right? You want me to say what I will say? No, that's not the lesson of Milei. Not at all. At all. There are lots of lessons of Milei. That is not one of them.
So it's very revealing how much he wears his anti-Scott bias on his chest. He's calling you names, calls you stupid, or he says your question is stupid. At first, he pretends to not even understand your question or your point, or even that it's a question. And then he goes on and just completely answers it as if he totally understands you and your psychology and how stupid you are. So he's got to get his rhetoric straight. It's like it's all over the place. I think he's got brain to mouth disease. Like he doesn't take a minute or a second just to process his initial thoughts and then say, whoa, that's anti-Scott bias, and then check it and just objectively read your question and try to make sense of what you're saying. It's like maybe it's not the best written question, but obviously he understood it.
Well,
He,
I'm making an implication of and when I say, without the usual both sides equivocating of the liberty movement, I mean that's to him, and he knows it.
yeah, maybe you got a little reaction out of him. He's a little emotional, and so the emotion sort of blocks that checking mechanism. So
We
you
yeah,
you
he
have
start
this you have this uncanny ability to trigger him emotionally. He just like can't deal with you.
he starts to say, "You're trying to get me to say," but then he kind of flips because he doesn't want to say the full implication out loud. That I think he's been slowing the influence of objectivism by going too easy on the left. So he pivots to, "You're trying to get me to say what I'm going to say," and then just goes back to what he wants to say.
As if you were trying to get him to say something. I mean, you're just you're just making a question and or asking a question and trying to make a point, right? It's
Yeah,
not like
it's an honest question. I mean, Milei got there by fighting the left. He wasn't, it wasn't this. And believe me, there is a bad right, and he brings up different forms of collectivism. But I mean, even the Peronist right, don't cry for me, Argentina. I mean, Evita was a socialist. Peron was they combined fascism and socialism, which is kind of what the WEF does.
yeah, I mean, but he so what his one of his problems is he tries to deflect from your question or your point, and by calling you names and saying you have a dumb question and then pretending to not understand it. In my view, this might be some semi-calculated rhetoric, even though it sounds like he's just letting his emotions get the better of him. But his default automatic knee-jerk response is probably to deflect or evade, because he doesn't like your question, he doesn't like you, and so
Well,
he
it's the
wants to.
subject
He wants
matter.
to.
I'm
So he
telling him
wants.
you've got to fight the left to get power and to get influence. You got to be willing to take the slings and arrows that come with fighting them. And he's still trying to get published in the Atlantic.
Yeah, but he doesn't want to hear your point. That's my point. My
I
point is
understand.
I understand what you're trying to do, and I think he understands what you're trying to do, but like on one hand, you're trying to get him to just take your question at face value and your point, but he's not having that. He wants to turn this into a clown show because the clown show is more entertaining and will deflect attention away from the more serious aspect of your question.
I do. I mean, it's part of that, but it's that our most consistent thread has been over whether the left or right is the bigger threat. And so, I mean, Milei so clearly seeing the left as a bigger threat and coming to power on it, and people responding to him, even though, he's a libertarian, is like, I mean, my point couldn't be made any more obvious. So I'm just bringing it up, and yeah, he's not ready to accept it.
He's not. I don't know if we have a clip to demonstrate this, but he's not even ready to accept that Milei was attacking the left mostly. He seems to be in denial about Milei being on the conservative side of the line of the battle line. Like
That's
he's
right.
so so my other point here is that I think it might just come down to Yaron being conflicted. On one hand, he wants your money, your super chat money, but then on the other hand, he doesn't want to have anything to do with you. So he needs to decide what his priority is and what his standard is, and whether he's going to continue to deal with you. And if he does decide to continue to deal with you, he should deal with you fairly. Like he should take your question seriously and not inject some crazy anti-Scott bias into his response.
Well, everyone should treat everyone fairly. But I do, and we do have that clip. I want to go in chronological order to some degree because also the Ayn Rand Institute scholars Nikos and Ben Baer and Agustina Vergara Cid, who's from who's from Argentina. And here Agustina talks about Milei misunderstanding Rand's essay, The Ethics of Emergencies.
So he's asked, will you do away with those? Because, these welfare programs, you're against the welfare state. So what are you going to do? So what he says in response to that is, we're going to apply what Ayn Rand calls the ethics of emergencies. And then he goes on to talk, what I interpret that he says is that he sees this situation of people being so poor and out of a job and all of that as an emergency. So because it's an emergency, government has to keep up these welfare programs, because otherwise people would starve, essentially. So he's saying we cannot take away the welfare immediately. We need to do it very slowly because, the ethics of emergencies. Now, that is a very misguided and completely wrong view of what this essay is about. I'm not sure why he likes to quote it so much. That is not what the essay is about at all. It's starting with the fact that the essay is about ethics and relationship between human beings, not between the state or the government and the individual.
Well, I think Augustina brings up an interesting question, and it's a very interesting point relating Milei's policies to the ethics of emergencies and how Milei has been referencing that essay. But I think she makes a mistake in that she's saying that the essay, or she's trying to say that the essay is not about the relationship between the government and people and individuals, but between, just individual to individual, I guess. And that's not my take on the essay. I'd have to go back and read it again. And I think we might do a show. Maybe we could do a show on just this aspect. How do you apply Ayn Rand's essay, The Ethics of Emergencies, to a social government situation? Because it's an interesting question.
I think that's fair. I think for me, I got out of this that people get all sorts of things from different essays. You may just get one piece. It may be just that he came to understand that there's different ethics in true emergencies. And he just picked up on that and said that's his excuse for being consistent with libertarianism while he's, cutting programs. He's not going to cut welfare first. I think any kind of incrementalist has thought about it, realizes you can't just cut social programs on day one fully, or, you're going to have riots in the streets from people who've become dependent on them. And just for them to be kind of micromanaging, there may be other stuff in the essay, but they're wanting him to go to ARU and become one of their students where they're correcting his essays.
Ayn Rand wrote for the layman, so I think it's fair to assume Milei doesn't need to go to Ayn Rand University to understand her essay. There was no such thing when she wrote the essay. You just have to have a basic grasp of objectivism and Ayn Rand's theory of morality to understand what she's saying in that essay. And I think it's a very interesting problem for Milei to apply the principles in that essay to his situation in Argentina, to apply it to what is clearly some sort of economic emergency going on over there. Their economy is collapsing. There's all kinds of social problems in Argentina that are threatening basically the existence of the nation. I think the nation, as it came up through the centuries, is being threatened now by the left. And the socialists are threatening to just destroy this country. So, and we're kind of experiencing that in America as well. So I think it should be considered an emergency, but it's not like a personal emergency where you're on a trolley track and you have to decide which way to swerve to avoid killing people. It's the sort of emergency that's at the national or societal level where you've got to decide what to do in order to save your civilization. in order to save your nation, you
Yeah.
know, from collapse, either economic or cultural collapse. And that's an interesting question. How do you apply this ethics of emergency to that situation? And you might even think of it as like a wartime situation, because I think one of the examples Rand gave was that, you know, a war is an emergency where your country's under attack and you have to immediately try to resolve this problem, you know, or else you're going to be overthrown and defeated.
Right.
So you can also apply that to social condition or an environmental condition or a cultural condition. And I think Milei is trying to apply it to his economic and cultural condition over there in Argentina.
Yeah, it just, to me, it speaks of a kind of intellectual academic snobbery to just say, oh, he's applying the ideas wrong. It's like, he's actually living in the real world, dealing with real world problems, not just, some rationalistic bubble where, you're just going for, this perfect understanding of Rand's ideas without ever having to apply it. But be that as it may, along these same lines, Ben's take was that he warned about Milei being too big tent.
And so while it's true that, I mean, Milei doesn't claim to be an objectivist, so it's not like he's misrepresenting himself as agreeing with Ayn Rand on this issue where he doesn't. He is still trying to be a member of this big tent libertarian movement, which is trying to graft together really actually opposing intellectual forces. Those liberal thinkers like Rand and Mises and Bastiat, who really did believe in individual freedom and protecting individual freedom with the government, and those like Rothbard and other anarchists who think we shouldn't have any government at all, a view that Rand thinks is ultimately anathema to liberty. And to the extent that he continues to try to push these together with his policies, and we'll have to see whether that's true, whether he's trying to, that's a big problem.
Didn't Yaron say that Rothbard was pretty good on economics, but bad on like social and cultural issues?
Yeah, well, he's trying to smooth Milei being for Rothbard, so Ben didn't necessarily get the memo on that. No, but
Yeah.
I think Ben
Well,
started.
so I'm not up to speed on Rothbard. It's been a while since I looked at him, but yeah, if it's true that a Rothbard is okay on economics, then I don't see the problem here, because Milei is trying to use Rothbard's economics, or the Austrian school, I guess, is more specifically. I don't know if Rothbard was part of the Austrian school, but I think the Austrian school is pretty compatible with Rand's economics. And so there wouldn't be much of a conflict there. So I'm not sure what, I think Ben's trying to make a broader point, which doesn't really apply to this particular context.
But it applies in the sense that he's sniping at him for being too big tent. How do you become president of a country without being somewhat big tent?
Yeah, it's a weird accusation. Big tent is a metaphor, you know.
But no, this is exactly why closed objectivism often becomes rationalism. He even started the segment by saying, now it's true he doesn't claim to be an objectivist, so we can't officially hit him for misrepresenting the philosophy, but he's still too open to working with others.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting how he begins that with the point that Milei is not trying to be an objectivist. It's almost as if Ben wishes he was trying to be an objectivist, so then Ben could go even harder on him.
Right. But then Ben could control him. He'd be his ARU teacher.
Yeah, so it's like Ben's like fantasizing about this potential, criticism he could make, but then he's like, damn it, I can't make it. So it's him speaking out loud, these thoughts that have nothing to do with his main point. filler, filler conversation for when you're speaking off the cuff and you just go from brain to mouth and you don't really have your points nailed down.
I mean, I just think it's sort of a pattern. When they were, with the Tea Party, it's like I got the sense that they kind of half expected the Tea Party to just now allow objectivism to become their leadership and to guide them going forward. And then that didn't happen. And they were just like one voice at the table. They were like, oh, forget these guys.
Yeah, I don't know. I think ARI never saw themselves as political leaders. They never, or like even cultural leaders. But they claim to want to bring about this second renaissance. But they don't really go after it too much. They don't try to assume the leadership role. They just want to sell books, sell Ayn Rand's books, and then teach her philosophy. And then occasionally, as a sort of afterthought, they kind of put out these op-eds or, these podcasts where they give their opinions. And then oftentimes these opinions are garbage. It's not well thought out.
Well, that's, yeah.
It's not like they can apply Rand's philosophy to a modern context, to today's context. It's always just some weird, archaic take that we've heard a million times already. And often it's wrong because they're working in the context of the 20th century when, we're moving into the 21st century here.
Well, speaking of things that we've heard over again, Agustina at the end says that she's worried that Milei may give capitalism a bad reputation if he doesn't succeed.
As an Argentinian myself, obviously, I really hope he does well, and he has this unique historical opportunity in Latin America that won't repeat itself to show that freedom works, but he has to implement the actual ideas of freedom. So part of it is not just because of the consequences in people's lives, right? But if he fails in his project because he doesn't implement the actual ideas of freedom, will tarnish the actual free market ideas of freedom forever, essentially, and people in Latin America will come to reject them, and then we are doomed for another 100 years, probably.
Well, what's so bad about being doomed for another 100 years? I thought that it was going to take 100 years for objectivism to penetrate the culture by your own count anyway.
Well, really, it's an admission that ARI has failed. If by this time ARI intellectuals aren't the representatives of capitalism, then it's their fault. It's their fault for not being more charismatic, being more persuasive, being more out there and joining groups and teaching them what capitalism is. This is the whole point of our argument or our proposal, that we need to be out there joining these groups and being part of their voice. So then we have a voice in their movement saying, this is what capitalism is. This is what you need to be promoting, and we'll have influence on them. Even if it's just this like nagging influence where we're just nagging them, and they don't really take us too seriously, at least we'll have a little bit of voice there, and we can say, this is what they're saying. We disagree in this and that way. This is what capitalism really is.
You still have to be willing to take the slings and arrows from the left. But, I just think that Agustina was giving what's actually more the traditional objectivist view when it comes to dealing with libertarians, which is why, they don't work with mixed groups, that it'll confuse people about, what capitalism really is. And, Milei's failure of his pragmatic approach, will make the left say, well, this is why you can't trust capitalism. But, I
no longer believe that that's their motivation for not dealing with libertarians. They claim that they don't want to be associated with them because the libertarians will then be confused with their views, and there'll be the sanction of the victim. So I think that what's really going on is that they're just afraid that they won't be able to compete. They'll get beaten down like Yaron was talked down to by Dave Smith. They rhetorically, they just can't deal with these people, and they can't win the debate. And it's pretty sad. And I think they can't win the debate ultimately because, and I've written an essay on this, I think Rand made a slight mistake in her definition of capitalism in saying that all property must be private property. And if you're an objectivist, you have to stick to that, or else you deviate from the official objectivist movement coming out of ARI. And I think they need to really check that premise and start agreeing with some of the libertarians who say, no, there's this need for public property. It's not, it doesn't have to all be private property.
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know,
you
do you
and
have something to
Leibowitz
say on that?
went, I remember you and Leibowitz going at it on that one time. But yeah, I
Well,
mean, that's
that
just
is the main debate here is people who agree with ARI and Michael Leibowitz, and then people who are coming around, like Richard Salzman agreed with me, I think, that there needs to be some room for public property in our concept of capitalism.
right. But also just in, any of these other closed decisions where they're saying you have to do this or believe this or you can't be an objectivist, or when there are things that weren't fundamental to Rand's philosophy. I was careful not to say that this is about closed objectivism being, that doesn't have a right to be for Milei. I think the fundamental issue is that you have to have repudiated Peter Schwartz's view that libertarianism is evil and shouldn't be sanctioned, which, Craig Biddle, for example, did. He talked last year saying, that it was to package open objectivism with debating slavery is like claiming that engaging with libertarians is akin to sanctioning the murderous Iranian theocracy. This, incidentally, is precisely what Peter Schwartz did in his 1989 essay on moral sanctions. He calls it an obscene equivalence. But that, even in defending having the debate in the first place, shows that he's an example of someone who has repudiated the Schwartz position. And
Yeah,
that is,
I think there's some truth to that. I think it goes back to the articles written by Schwartz and Peikoff. I think that there's an important distinction to be made on the sanction question. It's like, what are you sanctioning if you speak to someone you disagree with on certain elements of the philosophy? So if you are going to, like with David Kelley, he went to a libertarian group and spoke to them about how they need to change their ways. And if that's what you're doing, and then you're not sanctioning their ideas, you're not sanctioning the ideas you disagree with. You're going there essentially to argue with them and to have a conversation, a dialogue, and try to come to some agreement on a principle, which you can then use to say, hey, look, if you agree with me on this principle, then you should agree with me on this application where we differ.
to be fair, Peter Schwartz does address your point. He says if one wishes to reach out to those who've been defrauded by libertarianism, it cannot be done by speaking under the auspices of the defrauders. It cannot be done even if one's topic is why objectivism offers the proper foundation for genuine liberty.
I don't remember his reasoning, his exact reasoning or argument for that, but I think that's wrong. I think the question is, why can't it be that way? Why can't you go to their platform and debate them? You got to debate somewhere, and if not there, then where? And even if it is at their platform, still that doesn't mean you're sanctioning them. It just means you're agreeing that this is a justifiable place, or this is a decent place to speak. And it's like, they're not murderers, they're not promoting communism or something. at that particular place. Like if you were to go to a libertarian platform that promoted socialism or communism, then yeah, maybe I would agree. But even there's a question of, okay, you're going to a place where they support communism, but you're going there to try to destroy that place. You're going there to try, it's like an attack. You're going into enemy territory to try to take it down, to try to destroy it. And I think that's a moral purpose.
I don't even think the libertarians belong in that category, but I understand the point that you're making. It was a way of forbidding people to be libertarians, to try to stop losing more people to their movement.
Yeah, but I think here with Milei, we're actually discussing someone who is on board with the capitalist cause. He might not be perfect, and few are.
Applies to most libertarians.
Yeah, and he's an outright spokesman for capitalism and anti-socialism. You can't really ask for a better collaborator in the liberty movement, as an objectivist. If you're going to deal with a libertarian, that's the type you want to deal with. And I think there's a lot more libertarians like that than ARI will admit to. I think you can find a lot of libertarians who are very on board with capitalism, but they have some slightly different view of it, or maybe even a different formulation of the principle. And like I said, I even disagree with the way Rand defined capitalism. So I think there's room for the core element of capitalism to become this movement where you can rally around just this idea of free markets. And if people have disagreeing views of what property statuses should be, whether there should be public property or not, then that's a different issue that you can deal with. But the core one is, are you on board with this free market versus a centralized socialist market?
But the whole argument going back to Rand was you have to start with the metaphysics. If you don't have the epistemological and ethical base, then freedom means nothing. It's nihilism. That's what Schwartz was saying. So I agree with everything you're saying. I just think that us that have been talking about alliances all this time, we're the ones that are being consistent. They're the Johnny come latelys that are just trying to tag along because there's power now.
Yeah, well, you got to decide whether you're going to accept the bandwagon people or not. And I think that's a case-by-case basis. Some people are genuinely, interested in joining your movement, and some people aren't. And I think in some cases, people want to join a movement because it's becoming popular, and they want to get some of that popularity. Maybe they are just in it for new subscribers. They want to chase that clout, get a bigger audience who will then give them more money on their podcast on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, Yaron on his New Year's Eve show was still praising Milei, but tried claiming that he's neither right nor left.
Fundamentally, Milei is a free market guy. He's neither right nor left. He rejects both right and left. That's what makes him so interesting. That's what makes him so good. People have asked Yaron, but you don't like libertarians. And I don't. And I still worry about how this plays out. But this guy's smart. And if he knows one thing, he knows his economics. And he's a free market guy. Is he going to bring about anarchy to Argentina? No. He likes Rothbard. I know he likes Rothbard. Everybody has his flaws. And Rothbard, if you just study his economics, he's good. He was a good student of Mises. He gets it.
I think he's wrong that Milei rejects the right and the left. I think Milei, more to the point, he embraces parts of the right and the left. He embraces more of the right, especially when it comes to cultural issues or social issues. And then he's somewhat libertarian when it comes to economics. So, or maybe, I mean, somewhat liberal, but more libertarian. So I think it's not proper to frame it like Milei rejects the right and left. He embraces part of it, and mostly he's a conservative at heart. And he even started a group, La Libertad Avanza, my understanding, that is a conservative, mostly conservative group on social and cultural issues. So
Yeah.
it's not like he's rejecting these movements. He's trying to form a coalition between the two, the conservatives and the reasonable liberals.
That's the only way to counter left that's been taking over global cultural institutions. But
Yeah, and he's clearly anti-communist, anti-socialist, which is what we call the left here in America.
I love how Yaron is like, I still don't like libertarians, but call me Milei so I can set you straight on how to build coalitions.
Yeah.
Also, why is the new standard whether they're actually going to bring anarchy about? I mean, no one that David Kelley spoke to at that Libertarian Supper Club actually brought anarchy about or, had a chance of doing it.
Well,
I
sometimes I wonder if these anarchists are actual anarchists. What do they mean? Like, because when you talk to them, I've talked to a few, and when you listen to people like Michael Malice, they're not really for total anarchy.
they think people will just pick up the slack, but
Yeah, it's like they're for a bunch of mini governments or something. They just want to like get rid of the federal government, it seems, and have these mini governments, smaller governments.
but if anarchy
And
can't be brought about, and then libertarians and ANCAPs aren't bad.
yeah, well, they could be bad in philosophy,
Right,
and if
but
they're preaching the wrong ideas that are going to lead to evil consequences, then you probably don't want to have much to do with them. And that's how I feel about communists
I'm
and
just saying
socialists.
by your own standards, Malay's not actually going to bring anarchy about. As if that means, if that's the case, then you can talk to any libertarian you want.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're trying to figure out his standard there, like
I
which
know that's my problem.
yeah, why are you trying to figure that out? But I feel for you because I try to do that too. It's very confusing. What is his standard for dealing with people? It changes a lot. I don't know. I don't have much more to say about that because it's just, what are you gonna do? It's whatever the standard is. It's the standard of the day. It's whatever he decides at the moment.
Well, I couldn't handle that whole left right thing. So earlier this month, Yaron had a young Argentinian economist, Ivan Carano, on to talk about Milei. And I asked if indeed Milei went after the left and right equally. Yaron was not happy about the question. He took time out of the interview to type in the chat that I have a one-track mind. Yeah, wanting the truth. But to Yaron's credit, he did ask the question.
Did Milei fight the left and right equally in his election on his road to becoming president, or did he show more anger against the socialists?
No, I would say he showed more anger against the socialists.
Yep.
Okay, I'm glad we settled that false narrative that Milei was some both sides are bad, moral agnostic type.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious, I think. I don't even speak Spanish and can't understand, the interviews or what's going on in there. I have to rely on translations. And I think I have a clear understanding that he was against the socialists and, and that's why he got a lot of support from the right. So, or whatever they call the right in Argentina.
Exactly.
So,
Well,
but
I
it's
do want to.
interesting. It's interesting that he wouldn't call you stupid or call you names in front of this gentleman, Ivan Carino. Like
Right.
it's like he wants to maintain some decorum when he has a guest on, but when there's no guest, he'll call you all sorts of vicious names and not take you seriously. So
He
I
wanted the
like,
underlings to go after me in the chat without letting the guests know that's what he was doing.
yeah, but you could take a lesson from this and only ask him these sorts of questions when he has a guest on.
I mean, I was just, he announced that he was having this guest on. I was like, oh, okay, we can finally figure out if Milei was equally against the left and right.
Kind of like when you have a guest over to your house and you put on your best performance, and then the guest leaves and you're doing all sorts of vicious things to people, to your family or whatever. The classic trope of the man beating his wife, and then the guest comes over and he's all nice.
Oh, hi. Yeah. So I do want to get to this, the actual Milei speech to the World Economic Foundation. And it's fascinating. They had him there. They had Klaus Schwab introduce him. I read that he walked out during the speech. But, it's just laden with things that are, inspired by Rand and others in the liberty movement. And we'll just give a few examples. He starts out by warning that the West is in danger.
Today, I am present to inform you that the Western world is facing a significant threat. It is in danger because those who are supposed to defend the values of the Western world are co-opted by a worldview that inevitably leads to socialism and consequently to poverty and economic deprivation.
Love it.
Just point out that we're using the artificial intelligence version.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's this HeyGen software. The first translation was someone translating it live as he was speaking, but then they went back and translated it and changed his mouth to fit those words and put on like a slight Spanish accent, but it is in his own voice. At least, it's AI regenerated, which is fascinating itself.
Yeah, so this is actually my first time hearing the AI translation. I originally, watched the live translation with the real person,
right,
speaking English. So, but it seems like the AI is doing a good job here, just from this short clip. And I want to note initially that Milei, he doesn't begin by blaming the right for being religious or anything like that and saying, oh, the problems are religious people and all the things that they're going to bring about this evil civilization. And instead he says they're the defenders, people who are supposed to be defending the West, have been co-opted by socialism, or they're co-opting aspects of socialism. And that's what's causing the problem. It's socialism. So I think he does a good job of putting the blame squarely on socialism and people who are wittingly or unwittingly co-opting it for their own purposes. And which is something that Rand sort of did when she was attacking conservatives. She's saying, look, you need to stop with all this socialist stuff. And she also went into the religious stuff too, but I think it's better to focus on the socialist problems.
Yeah, I would think so in today's context, especially Argentina's. Milei also discusses splitting the pie and his influence from Israel Kirzner.
Social justice starts from the idea that the economy as a whole is a cake that can be distributed in a different way. But that cake is not given. It is wealth that is generated in what, for example, Israel Kirzner calls a market discovery process. If the good or service that a company offers is not desired, that company goes bankrupt unless it adapts to what the market is demanding. Create a high-quality product at a good price or attractive, succeed and produce more, so the market is a process of discovery where the capitalist finds the right direction on the go. But if the state punishes the capitalist for success and blocks him in this process, it destroys his incentives, and the consequences are that he will produce less and the cake will be smaller, generating harm to society. Collectivism, by inhibiting discovery and hindering appropriation, ties the entrepreneur's hands, preventing him from producing better goods and offering better services at a better price.
So maybe here's an example of where the AI gets it wrong. Instead of pie, the AI says cake. So I don't know if that's a accurate translation of what Milei say, but I kind of doubt it, since he's an economist and would be familiar with the concept of economic pie.
But you assume the translator isn't affected by his own biases.
Right. I think the translator got it right.
I'm just saying there's some words we don't know about.
Right.
And,
I mean, I'm just assuming because I didn't actually try to translate it myself. But yeah, I mean, the translator might have a bias, but he's also probably really familiar with, accurate metaphors and terms. But where the AI might not be familiar with certain metaphors, metaphorical usages or saying. So I don't know. We don't want to turn.
I don't want to get bogged down in that, but I mean, ultimately, you can still hear that it's certainly liberty inspired, if not from Rand and others.
Right. And I like his concept of the market discovery process that he describes from this Israel Kirzner.
Right.
I never heard of Kirzner, but it sounds like an interesting concept and probably accurately describes an idea, that people are missing, and a lot of people probably don't understand, like what the importance is of leaving people free to discover, what the market wants and what drives the capitalists to make goods and produce goods and seek profits. I think in general, I think there is a problem with Millei's concept of market forces and stuff like that, because his administration claimed or said that they were going to stay with the Paris Climate Accords because that's what the market demands. And I think that he's some way applying this market discovery process to government policies.
I don't know that we're always getting the real story on these global agreements. They could have been strong-arming.
Well, he says he doesn't believe in climate change, or at least that's what I've read. And yet he's applying this market discovery process as if it's some like right, like you apply individual rights to people, even though you disagree with what they do. Like he's for legalization of drugs. Like, so, you say, well, people have the right to do drugs if they want to, but I think it's wrong. I don't agree with doing drugs. And it seems like here he's saying, well, the market demands that we agree to the Paris Climate Accords, but I disagree with it. It seems like he's got this twisted, and that might be from the leftist or liberal side of him, because you notice that with people like Biden who are anti-abortion, but then they're like, yeah, but then we're going to allow abortion because you should be allowed to kill or murder your baby, even though I disagree with it.
I see it more like a free market congressman coming into Congress, and the district is used to getting a bunch of goodies, and if he's just the guy that's like, oh, we don't want any goodies, and yes, from a principle standpoint, that's true, but it may make it so he doesn't get reelected the next time. And the Paris Climate Accord, I just suspect there's something in there where for non-big countries, it may be a net benefit the way they have it as some sort of global socialism, that it just would be stupid if he didn't accept it because it's a better deal, and he's got to think of himself as an advocate for Argentina.
Well, I don't hear that rhetoric.
He's not going to say that.
I couldn't find very many articles on this. And the one article I read that there was no mention of some pragmatic reason for staying with the Accords.
Nobody says I'm under duress.
Okay, well, that's assuming a lot. You're
I'm just saying that
speculating.
I'm not ready to bail on him over I mean these global accords. There's just a lot of pressure that's being brought to bear. They're planning to do a general strike in 2 days, January 24th. So we'll see how that plays out when when that happens and they start really turning the screws on him. Argentina owes so much in debt that these global agencies can toy with him at will. I suspect that's at least partially why they gave him this audience and allowed him such a big platform, because it's like with Liz Truss in the UK, they want to make it spectacular, showing that her going her own way, trying to adopt market reforms, leads to disaster. And it wouldn't totally surprise me if they're trying to set some similar scenario up here.
Yeah, I'm sure just like the deep state and the left pushed back against Trump, they're going to push back against Milei. And I'm concerned that he won't get a lot of his policies through, or he has this decree 70/2023, which I guess is his article for deregulating the economy. But
Right.
his Congress has to approve it. So we'll see if they agree to that, or how much pressure the Congress will have to go along with his policies. So obviously he needs to cooperate or get cooperation from the opposing party in that country, and we'll see if that happens.
Sure. Well, in this clip, Milei discusses how blaming markets is in fact a contradiction.
The issue with neoclassicals is that since the model they fell in love with doesn't match reality, they attribute the error to the supposed market failure instead of revising the premises of their model. On the text about a supposed market failure, regulations are introduced that only generate distortions in the price system that hinder economic calculation and consequently savings, investment, and growth. This problem essentially lies in the fact that not even supposedly libertarian economists understand what the market is, since if it were understood, it would quickly be seen that it is impossible for there to be such a thing as a market failure. The market is not just a graphical description of a supply curve and a demand curve on a graph. The market is a mechanism of social cooperation where property rights are voluntarily exchanged. Thus, considering this definition, discussing market failure is a contradiction in terms.
You're not a real libertarian until you say none of the other libertarians are getting it right either.
Well, yeah, I think it's a pretty insightful point, and it sounds a lot like Rand to me. Very Rand-esque attack on a false concept.
Oh, to call it a contradiction in terms, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and he's pointing out that this concept market failure is, in my words or in Rand's words, we would say it's an anti-concept, but he's calling it like this this fake false concept that doesn't actually happen. Like there aren't actually market failures, so it's a concept that describes nothing. And as an anti-concept, I think it tends to destroy the idea of government intervention causing market problems, not failures, but disturbances in the economy.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Like
it's been the refrain of every statist. It's just like, oh, the market failed. We need more regulation.
Yeah, it's just a way for them to deflect from the government intervention and then blame capitalists.
And sometimes the normal business cycle.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, there's ebbs and flows, and capitalists make mistakes. They don't always discover the correct process or discover what they should actually be producing at a certain time or selling at a certain price. And so there's mistakes that are made, but the market is the market. People negotiate prices and decide they overproduce, and then so they cut their prices. So there are mechanisms for keeping the market going. And like he says, it doesn't just fail. You know, if the market failed, then human society would fail, basically, because human society is dependent upon the markets. So unless you have an abject failure of society and civilization, the market's not going to fail. So I like this emphasis also, where he's saying, if you don't see that there's government intervention, you need to check again. Because, you know, essentially it's kind of like Rand saying, check your premises.
Right.
Because he's saying, look at reality. Where Rand was saying, check your principle. Milei saying, look at reality again, because you're missing something. It has to be government intervention.
Absolutely. Well, in this next clip, he talks about how socialism changed from class warfare to identity politics.
Given the resounding failure of collectivist models and the undeniable advances of the free world, socialists were forced to change their agenda. They left behind the class struggle based on the economic system to replace it with other supposed social conflicts equally harmful to community life and economic growth. The first of these new battles was the ridiculous and unnatural fight between man and woman.
He goes into some others like man versus nature and things like that. But it's great because, I mean, this is to all those ninnies that say, oh, that's not like the old left. The woke isn't Marxism. It's completely different. And it's like, they just changed the standards for who they're pitting against each other.
Yeah, this is classic behavior from like sociopaths. You know, if you catch them in one lie or one problem, they'll just shift it and come up with some other lie. They try to live a life of lies to explain their lies, you know? So here you're dealing with socialists who have failed in the traditional class warfare project between upper and lower classes, or the rich and the poor. And so now they're pitting man versus woman, which are just two more classes, you know, that you can pit against each other. You know, I guess it's less ridiculous than pitting blondes versus brunettes, but in my opinion, there's no real like substantial difference there. Man versus woman, that's ridiculous. And it's,
well, they're looking
it's
for
warfare.
historical marginalizers and men. You know, I mean, this is like the wave of feminism that says sex is rape.
Yeah, but it also goes to power. So if it were the case that blondes had extreme power and brunettes had little power, then there would probably be a blonde versus brunette class warfare struggle, or a fake one. But man, in some regards, is more powerful in terms of physicality than woman generally. So they're able to get away with this fake issue of man versus woman. He calls it unnatural. But I don't know. I think there are natural differences that you can point to, and there's a reason why there are two classes, man and woman. That's a fact. But trying to pit them against each other politically is a whole nother issue.
Well, you remember our What is a Woman episode. Some people think gender's a construct.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the extreme subjectivists.
But that is part of what he's addressing, was saying pitting man against woman.
I know. Well, most socialists are extreme subjectivists these days. So it's easy to lump the two together.
Right.
So I think socialists who are primarily subjectivists, they're leading the charge. And so you get the Democrat Party or the left in general being overrun by these ideological subjectivists who are overwhelming the more commonsensical people on the left or in the Democratic Party, who are just weak intellectually, and so they can't stand up to the subjectivists. They have a sort of objective bone in their body, but it gets just crushed because they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to apply objectivity. They just have this sense that, this is bullshit, but I don't know how to defend reality.
Yeah, and they're more afraid of getting canceled by woke than we are, because it's all their friends and family.
Yeah, they could be power lusters, so they would rather exchange the power for being honest and true to the facts. There's all kinds of reasons why people would give up on reality.
Absolutely. And postmodernism teaches that all relationships are basically power struggles. In this next clip, he talks about how the updating the meaning of socialism to just controlling the means of production.
To many, it may sound ridiculous to suggest that the West has embraced socialism, but this view is only ridiculous if one limits themselves to the traditional economic definition of socialism, which states that it is an economic system where the state owns the means of production. In my opinion, this definition needs to be updated to reflect the current circumstances from my perspective. Today, states don't need to control means of production to control every aspect of individuals' lives.
Powerful.
Yeah, we've been discussing this in prior episodes where there's still this idea that companies are private, and then there's private versus public companies. But a lot of these so-called private companies or corporations are just nominally private. They're just private in name only, and they're actually arms of the state. They do the state's bidding, and you can, in some sense, you should consider them as public institutions controlled by the state, or at least manipulated by the state, because a lot of these corporations are under obligations or threats from the government.
They use the term public-private partnership. So yeah, and it's seeing that as global governance as different as the globalism that Milei is against. That's a kind of fascism versus these libertarians that try to tell us, oh, globalism's just trade. Don't worry about what the WEF's doing.
Yeah. So what I think is going on is that we're in a transition period where the government is exerting its influence and power over a lot of corporations, and a lot of corporations are bowing to that power. And eventually, you're going to get to the point where it's the government, there's going to be no camouflage over this relationship. It's just going to be, okay, we're doing the government's bidding, it's obvious. It's going to become so obvious, and all the secret documents will come out like they are now with Twitter, like they did with Twitter and other institutions. It's going to be so obvious that they're just going to admit to it, and people will have, by that time, people will have been conditioned to accept it. You're going to be saying, oh yeah, well, that's how it's done. The government pressures the business to do things, and that's the way it is. Because most people, they don't want to get involved. They don't want to, change things, as long as it's not directly affecting them and their family, and they're able to go along and get along. They're just going to accept what's going on, and so there'll be this gradual takeover of the economic world by the government, and it'll just naturally become a full-blown fascist.
But I mean, people in Argentina eventually got sick of it, so maybe there's hope for everyone else as well. Yaron, for his part, praised Milei's speech to Davos. He thought it was so great, in fact. Well, I'll let you tell me if he's half accusing Milei of plagiarizing.
Either he or speechwriters or somebody close to him has watched my videos. There's just stuff that he said, and even the structure of a part of a talk. It's as if, there are two moments where this happened. One is when he talks about, he really structures it. look, here's the practical case for capitalism. It works, it produces the wealth. But that's not the it's the moral issue. And that's what everybody attacks. It's the morality of capitalism. But capitalism is moral. Now, he doesn't give a very good explanation why capitalism is moral. He fails there, which is tragic. He needs to do a much better job there. But he doesn't, it's not awful what he does, but it's just not good. But that structure, that follows my morality of capitalism talks.
Very weird accusation to make.
He is the revolution.
It's like, I don't think Yaron invented that distinction between the practical and moral reasons for capitalism.
Right. I think Rand did that. You know, and that's
someone
what I'm saying.
before him did that.
Yeah, he's inspired by lots of different people. I mean, I just, you know, it's nice that Yaron's at least willing to accept that it may have been one of Milei's speech writers that lifted Yaron's ideas during a talk. So he can say he's not directly accusing Milei at this point in his investigation.
I think Milei's smart enough to realize what Yaron's doing there, and he's not going to fall for that. Because Milei has speechwriters, and it sounds like he's the type of person who's going to stand by his speechwriters. So it doesn't matter whether Yaron attacks Milei or his speechwriters. He's attacking Milei. He's saying Milei stole my structure from my speech, which is ridiculous. He's willing to
let that be water under the bridge if he's made an advisor.
Well, first of all, stealing the structure of a speech, like not even the whole structure of a speech, just like one example of where he juxtaposes the practical versus the moral. It's like, it's just the one aspect. Was that his whole speech? Was that the whole structure of his speech? Or is he going after like one commonsensical, rational, juxtaposition of these two reasons? Like, if this is objectivity, then he's not even giving Milei the credit of being able to figure it out himself. Like, if that's what reality is, this is how you sell capitalism. You say, look,
he was kind of saying he's copying him and doing a terrible job at
it. Yeah, well, I agree partially with that. I don't think Milei made the best moral case for it, but he's at least going in that direction.
Right.
So my main point is that he needs to get more specific with his accusations of plagiarism if he's going to actually do this. But this is the problem: is he half-asses it. He just, like, it's like a thought in his brain that he hasn't chewed over for at least a couple minutes, and then he just comes out of his mouth half-baked, and then he starts realizing, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just his speechwriters or something. Like, he tries to like then put tags on the idea. So
he forgot his it's probably delusional disclaimer.
Yeah, he should that should be his standard disclaimer. I might be delusional.
No, but I mean, again, I am glad that at the end of the day, he is at least optimistic about it and not doing the usual libertarian boilerplate about, or objectivist boilerplate about, they're going to confuse people and they're nihilists and libertarians are evil. It's just like, give the man a chance. And even though I think that, he may not be consistent, I'm happy for it. And the other thing is, I do think that, again, the lesson of Milei is you show that you're willing to take the slings and arrows of going after the left and humiliating them. And, you build up a following over time.
Well, I also asked myself, what is the lesson of Milei? And I'm not sure if maybe a country or a nation needs to hit rock bottom and just become this socialist hellhole before people will accept a radical idea, like Milei and his capitalist, policies.
That's the theme of Atlas Shrugged. That's why they were trying to accelerate it.
It is the theme of Atlas Shrugged, and we see it being played out in Argentina. and I'm worried. Is that what's going to happen in America? You know, do we have to just endure the left and just go through hell and watch our economy totally tank before, you know, before libertarians will say, God damn it, maybe we should just back the conservatives and the Republicans and get them in power and then work with them and just try to just destroy the left. Because I don't see it happening any other way. There's too much division in America, and we can't get enough support for the people who are trying to form some sort of capitalist idea. And
I believe Milei has done, just by winning, has done a lot to help the kind of right libertarian coalition. It's the future of standing up to the left and these globalist institutions. It's us or no one.
Yeah, I mean, I hope Milei can solve the problems in Argentina and be a shining example for the rest of the world. You know, but it's sometimes you have to go through it yourself before you realize, you know, that you need to change. It could, on smaller examples, it could, you know, for a person, an individual, it could be something like dating the wrong type of girl or something. You have to go through that experience before you understand that that's not the right path. But on a more national level, maybe we just have to date socialism a little longer before we realize that it's a terrible idea and we need to change. And because you can even look at Milei and it won't register with you, or it won't register with a lot of people in America. You know, he's in Argentina, he's not in America. Argentina is a different country. So they have all sorts of excuses, you know, rationalizations for why we shouldn't go the path of Milei. And until it happens in your backyard or in your house, then you have less, you know, excuses for not changing. And then you're kind of forced into it because your very life, your very society, your very nation is at risk. And you realize, well, damn it, we got to do something.
Yeah,
so
I mean that happens, I think, at certain levels the whole way down. But you know, part of it is that he seems to be the right guy for the right time, and I'm hopeful. Like we said, we have that general strike coming. Part of my concern about Yaron and the you know, left-leaning liberty movement people is that they're going to be so quick to just turn on him once the establishment says you need to do so. And that they're going to be, you know, trashing him soon anyway, and going back to that boilerplate about, oh, now he's confusing what real capitalism is.
Well, do you think that Milei will cause such a stir that the establishment in America will start issuing demands and canceling people if they don't toe the line?
I don't think in America Milei is going to be telling people to cancel people. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
No, I mean the left, the establishment left. So
well, it's more the global establishment. They're going to give him the Liz Truss treatment, destroy his economy, and then say, oh, you want to defend that?
Is the establishment in America, you look at Milei's, you know, policies, and like, what does he have to do in Argentina for the establishment in America to turn on him?
I'm not even talking about America per se. It's these global institutions like the WEF that just had him there. And I mean, you know, yeah, so I think the American left doesn't want him to succeed.
So the Global Institute, is there an example of where Yaron toes the line of the global institutions? Is that his main concern?
Well, I'm just concerned about him. You know, like, I feel like Objectivism left the Tea Party once the you know, that was the first time the left said, oh, you have to dismiss them as racist. And so a lot of mainstream groups did that, and that, there's just going to be pressure to vilify Milei and to step away from him and be like, oh, he's a crazy kook. You now have to turn on him. I mean, look at stuff with COVID and the vax and the way the global institutions were pushing that.
Yeah, I don't. We should have a show on this because I think there's some nuance to Yaron's decisions. I don't think it's always based on appeasing the left. It's often he takes a principled stand and he thinks it's true that if you don't take the vaccine, you're dumb or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk all that out, sure. But any final thoughts on Milei?
Yeah, generally I like Milei from what I've researched recently. And I hope that he does find good advisors and is able to negotiate the problem of getting changes done, like because Trump had that problem. Even though he was president, he had to deal with the left or the Democrat Party, and Milei is going to have that same problem. He's got to get a coalition together. He's got to get people from the opposite side to join him in certain changes that need to be made, and hopefully he can convince them, because a lot of this has to do with your ability to persuade people and meet their arguments and have counterpoints and convince people, especially young people. I don't know if he's going to convince the hardened socialists in his country, but hopefully he can convince enough middle of the roaders and libertarians and young people, so that he can get a base of support that will just overwhelm the socialists. I think that's the driving factor here, is he needs to be able to just bulldozer over the socialists and communists in his country, and we need to start doing that in America as well.
It's a nice ideal, but it starts with building coalitions of other people to help get it done. But yeah, I think there is potential, and we're gonna probably do another show on him before not too long if things hold up. You may not like your own sentiment about it being fascinating to see, or it being interesting or entertaining to see, but I do think it's going to be fascinating to see it all play out. I do agree with him there.
Well, let me make one more quick point. Just so that I'm not completely critical about Yaron, I said earlier that I do think he's right on one point, where Milei doesn't get the moral argument for capitalism, perfectly. I think that the problem here is represented in his argument that capitalists are social benefactors, and we hear that a lot as a reason for why capitalism is good, because it creates these rich businessmen and productive businessmen who benefit society, and you sort of take on the mantle of a benefactor. But I think that's a bad argument for capitalism. It's based on welfareism, and I think Rand had the better argument. She based it on rewarding selfish action. Like capitalism is moral because it allows people to pursue their self-interest, and because they're pursuing their self-interest as a group, all of these egoistic people just naturally raise society up, because they're part of society. And as you have a bunch of individuals who raise up society, and then anyone who needs charity, then there's a lot of extra money going around to provide charity to the people who are destitute or have physical incapabilities and actually need assistance. But that's not because they're benefiting society. But they're benefiting individuals who need particular help.
You can benefit, or you can use multiple arguments, even if Rand's is the most fundamentally correct, and just some combinations of words are more persuasive with some people. But I really have enjoyed the talk, and we'll look forward to talking more about Milei as he governs.
Yes.
So,
great talk.
What was that?
Yeah, great talk. I look forward to the next discussion.
Absolutely. Well, again, I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig. This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you next time.